Your portraits don't look professional, and it's probably not the gear. It's usually a handful of things that no one wants to talk about, but once you get them, your portraits will forever be changed. Today, I'm going to walk you through the biggest reasons why your portraits look amateur and, well, how to change that. Now, if you guys are new here, hi, my name is Josh, and I have been taking pictures for the last 14 years. So over those 14 years, I've learned a thing or two, or thousands of things actually, and these videos are all about that. Now, when I first started out, I was, well, 10 years old, and I did not have the knowledge that I have today in the world of photography. So through a ton of trial and error, testing out different things, failing, succeeding, and everything in between, I've learned a lot, especially in the world of portraiture. And of all of those things that I've learned, I've broken it down into 7 very digestible, very understandable things that you can take to make your portraits amazing and professional. Okay, point number 1, light is everything. Light, light, light. Other light is everything and helps to shape the story or give energy and mood to the story. Now the key here is not to think that only natural light or only artificial light is the better way to go. Both are amazing choices. The key here is intentionality, actually understanding how light shapes and sculpts and tells the story better and emphasizes the effect of that portrait. Now the pros, they shape light. They help with the direction, the softness or the harshness, even the quality of light. There's so much to it than just adding light to your subject or to your scene. There is so much more intention that goes behind the lighting of everything you see in a picture. Now, most photographers start out as natural light photographers because, well, that is just what's available and what makes the most sense because it doesn't involve a lot of extra gear. So in that case, what I would advise you to do is learn about some simple pieces of gear like reflectors or diffusers, things that help to shape and direct the light a bit more specifically than if you were just relying on the natural light by itself. And again, just overall thinking about how the light in your scene on your portrait is helping to convey the message of that image. Do you want a really harsh, direct light to add that punch-in-the-face style energy to your picture? Or do you want a more soft and diffused light to add calmness and gradual ease to the picture? Again, neither is right or wrong, but understanding light is everything. Alright, point number 2 is background control. Now, it's really easy for some people to say that a busy or cluttered background is not the way to go, and to simplify it, get rid of things, make it more minimal, and that's the better image. But I'm here to tell you that that's not always the case. In fact, sometimes a busier and more lively and more confusing background can again add to the emphasis of the portrait. Not all the time, but sometimes. So again, a lot of these points in this video are going to be around the intentionality of each point. In this one, for example, the background. You want to make sure that the background is supporting what the picture is trying to convey. If you have a soft looking subject with soft light, with an easy pose, very natural and flowy, well then the background might not make a lot of sense if it was busy and cluttered and full of random stuff. In this example, it might make more sense to have a simpler background, sometimes so blown out you can't even tell what the background is, something that just makes the image feel at ease with the subject. But then other times, let's say with concert photography, you want that chaos, you want that cluttered, busy background because that's the energy that the artist, or in this case the subject in the portrait, is getting off. But on the contrary to all that, there's also juxtaposition with backgrounds and subjects. In that concert example, you can frame your subject, the artist, against a very bland background or all black background to add negative space, to make them feel isolated, to put all the focus just on them, and that's also a good decision. Again, intentionality. Point number 3 is posing and expression. Now this goes with all types of images and video with subjects. The pose and the expression has to make sense. For example, this YouTube video right here, this talking head shot, if I just sat here and frowned the entire time while I talked, it wouldn't really be that interesting at all. In fact, it would kind of be depressing and maybe even turn you off from watching the video. But if I have a much more lively expression, obviously a pep in the way I'm talking, I'm smiling, I'm animating with my expressions, all this stuff, it adds to the image. With posing, you'll be able to tell that a pose is amateur if they look stiff or uncomfortable. You want the pose to look natural, very one with the subject, as opposed to feeling like the subject was in a very tense situation. And the reality is that a lot of time poses are uncomfortable in real life, but a good model and a good photographer will be able to pose in a natural way that shows ease and that shows that comfort. Now, as the photographer, the pros will direct a model on how to act, not just how to pose, but direct them on the energy and the vibe they want to go for, and not just tell them the exact position they want them in. For example, instead of telling your model to put one foot in front of the other and have your arms swaying, that's just like a stiff pose like this. Tell your model, pretend to be walking towards me like you're walking towards a best friend. Simple cues like this will give your model much more life and much more energy to really complement the portrait. And energy is a key word here that I'm going to say a lot in this video, because energy is felt so much through static images, and that is one thing that amateur photographers don't realize, is that energy can be felt even through a static portrait. All right, point number 4 is composition choices. Now, composition is arguably one of the most important things when it comes to photography, because it gives the viewer an initial sense of direction, of scale, of perspective, all of those things that help to give the viewer some context to the scene. Now, some people out there will say that amateur photographers just center the subject and call it a day, and yes, that is a common mistake, to only stick to one type of composition, but centering your subject is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. It's again all about that intentionality with the composition. If you want your subject to feel alone and isolated, well then maybe add more negative space around them and throw them in a third or a corner of the frame as opposed to dead center. If you want the subject to be like 99% of the focus in the shot, well then maybe fill most of the frame with the subject and leave very little room for the background. If you want your model to look very grand and tall, well then maybe you as the photographer should shoot from down low to make the perspective of them look bigger. And if you want them to look small and diminished, well then maybe shoot from high up down low like this to give the photographer or the viewer an overpowering view over the model. So the simple fix here is move around, try out different compositions, and see how each different composition will help or not help the final portrait. And after a while, after a bunch of different examples and scenarios, you will totally understand what I mean about how composition is going to help or make or break an image. Point number 5 is depth and separation. Now, amateur photographers tend to not separate the subject from the background, but the pros will intentionally separate them using a bunch of different methods, whether that's aperture, using a lower aperture like f2.8 or 1.8 to get a blurrier background, lighting to separate the light on the subject from the light in the background, or even what is in the background, back to that whole idea of decluttering or adding clutter to the background. Anything that helps to separate your subject from the background will again help to emphasize the subject, the model in the picture. I don't know about you, but every time I shoot a friend's picture or a family's picture when we're out and about, let's say we're out for dinner, the immediate thing is for everyone to go right up against the wall, press up right against the wall, and that is almost never gonna make a good picture because there's no separation. So no matter the picture, I get somebody to step 3, 4, 5 feet away from the wall if I have space, and then take the picture. Now, there are subjective cases where you want the subject and the background, the scene, to really blend in, kind of giving that Where's Waldo effect, but that is a rare case and can be really effective, but in general, depth and separation is key. Point number 6 is colors and editing. Now, technically, this could be 2 different points, but for the sake of the video, let's make it 1. For color, you want to think about while you're shooting the image, what colors are in your frame. Are there any colors in the background here that are distracting the viewer from me, the talking head subject in the frame? If there was like a really bright lime green subject up here or a purple subject over there, it might distract the viewer a lot from what is actually happening and the focus of the picture. So thinking about how the colors in your frame help to tell the story will definitely either add or take away from the effectiveness of the portrait. One thing you can try out here is if your model or subject is wearing something fun and colorful, well then maybe opt for a more subdued and neutral background like black, gray, white, or brown. Whereas if the subject is wearing neutral colors, well then maybe opt for a more colorful background to again complement and balance out both sides of the image. Again, that's just a general tip. That's not always the case. Sometimes you want the background and the subject to be matching completely, but as a general rule, you want to think about how colors play a large part in how the image energy comes across. And then when it comes to an edit, I'm assuming you're using a software like Lightroom, you can manipulate the hue, saturation, and luminance of every single color in the rainbow. And think about that when you're actually going to edit the picture. Is there a color in this picture that is too pronounced and too obvious, or not pronounced enough, and I want to bring it up? Bring that saturation up. Is there a color where the color of the color doesn't really make sense and I need to adjust the hue of that color? Small things like that are what separate the pros from the amateurs. And then point number 7, the most important point of all of the points in this video, and that is intentional storytelling. Now, amateurs, for them, a portrait is just a picture of a person, but the pros are trying to tell a story. Now, let's not get it twisted. Not every single portrait is trying to tell a really deep story, but when somebody looks at your picture, they should be able to kind of frame some sort of context as to what the picture is about. Now, the most obvious case of this is in journalism portraits, where you obviously are trying to tell a story through your journalism and through your portrait work. But for almost every other type of portrait work, you want the viewer to know kind of what the context of what was happening in that shot or around that shot. For example, if you saw a picture of a woman with her makeup and hair done in a beautiful white gown holding a bouquet of flowers, and around her was beautiful lush greenery and very bright, light, airy colors, you would probably think that that is a wedding picture. And that is as simple as it can be, is make sure you are telling a story in your images and not just taking a picture. To work on this one, you want to actually do this ahead of your shoot and plan what the story is, what the intention is behind these shots, so that when you go to execute on the pictures, that idea, that story is top of mind. One big caveat here is that the story doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't need to be a story that we all know already. It can actually be something that's a bit confusing and a bit new to the viewer. For example, if you had a man with a perfect three-piece suit on top of a horse, or if you had a race car driver in a helmet and full race car gear, but he's standing in the middle of a grocery store. Or what about a model with a bikini on, but she's in the Arctic? Sometimes those juxtaposing and confusing stories can even add more interest to the storyline. Again, the story does not actually need to make sense, but there has to be intentionality behind it. Oof, okay, that was a lot of info in a very short amount of time that I could probably make a whole video on each of these 7 points. Maybe I will actually. But those are the 7 key things that I think about when I took my pictures from being amateur to going full professional. And along the way, you will mess up and miss some of these points, and that's okay. They're not meant to be studied like a Bible, but they are meant to be understood so that after months and years of shooting, all of this will become second nature and obvious to you. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below and the like button, and leave a comment on what you want to see more of on this channel. But until next time, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.